Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another video. Today is the first day of our multi-day stretch of potentially significant severe weather on tap for parts of the plains into the Midwest and Mid-South. Apologies for the road noise outside. I'm coming to you from Amarillo, Texas this morning, about to head north into Kansas for today's severe weather threat. Again, this is expected to be a fairly potent stretch of severe weather, so wanted to come back to this morning and do a video for you with some updates. We've had some changes since our last video a couple days ago, so wanted to get a video out this morning for now that we have some fresh observed data in, some new model data, and we'll go over that in today's video. Today's outlook is what you see on your screen here. Kind of a bimodal enhanced risk level 3 out of 5. First enhanced risk, kind of the main risk area, is expected to be up from western into northwest Kansas, places like Garden City up to Colby, Scott City, Oakley on the I-70 corridor there in northwest Kansas. Our second enhanced risk down here from northwest Texas into central Oklahoma, including the OKC metro area, for a separate area of storms expected to develop this evening. All hazards on the table for today. There is a 10% hash tornado risk up here in western Kansas within that northern enhanced risk, so we could see a strong tornado or two up in that portion of the risk area. Large 5 and 2% areas surrounding that. Large to very large hail expected with these storms as well. 30% hashed area in both of those enhanced risk areas, so could see some large to even giant hailstones today, 2, 3, maybe even 4 inches in diameter. Pretty potent environment for some large hail today. Large 15% hashed area extends up from northeast Colorado all the way down the dry line into southwest Texas, so a broad swath of large to very large hail threat for today. Damaging winds also going to be a threat, in particular with that southern enhanced risk as it congeals into an MCS overnight. So pretty potent setup for today. A little bit of a change from what we saw in our previous outlook, where we had just a large enhanced risk area extending down in from southern Nebraska all the way into northwest Texas. They've kind of split that up into two areas today. We'll go over why that's the case in just a second. Then we get into Friday. They have outlined an enhanced risk. Once again, level 3 out of 5. They're up for portions of northeast Kansas, eastern Nebraska, into southwest Iowa, northwest Missouri. A large slight risk extending down into the southern plains and Arklatex as well. So large area of severe threat, but the greatest threat for Friday, April 26th, expected to be in that enhanced risk area there across the central plains into Midwest. Strong tornadoes going to be a threat for that area as well as down along the dry line, 2 and 5% risk areas extending down into Texas. So tornadoes definitely on the table for Friday. Large hail, 30% hashed area there in the enhanced risk, as well as damaging winds. So once again, an all hazards threat on the table for Friday. Then we go into Saturday. Saturday has had the look of a pretty significant potential severe weather outbreak here for a few days now. SPC has gone with an enhanced risk. Thought there were some rumblings that they might go with a rare day 3 moderate, but that is not the case. Large enhanced risk up from kind of northwest Missouri into the eastern half of Kansas, central Oklahoma down into northern Texas, where we could see the threat for all hazards, some of which could be significant. Slight risk does extend up into the Great Lakes region, Wisconsin into Michigan, and then down into parts of southwest Texas. But that greatest threat for Saturday going to be within that enhanced risk area, 30% hashed area for significant severe, and they do mention the threat for very large hail and significant tornadoes, pending a few things, still contingent on a few things, and we'll go over that here in this video. And then we go into Sunday. The threat shifts east once again into the Midwest, down into the Arklatex. So going to focus on today's threat in this video. I hope to be back with additional videos as time warrants in the next few days as these daily setups approach. So we're going to focus on the today's threat in this video, but we will discuss the Friday threat and then the Saturday and Sunday threat as we go toward the latter half of the video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Here we are. Let's go right into our model data this morning. This is, our mesoanalysis data this morning. This is our 500 millibar map at 12Z from the SPC mesoanalysis page. And this is our big old trough that we're watching here, and that will be our big synoptic scale forcing mechanism for this severe weather threat. It is lagging a little bit farther behind compared to what previous progs were showing. The axis of the trough, if we were to draw that in here, slightly negatively tilted trough at this point, somewhere in the Great Basin down into the southwest Arizona area, into western Mexico, Baja California. Nice little jet streak rounding the base of this trough. This is expected to continue to move off to the northeast and east as we go into the day today and start to eject into the plains, but a little bit on the later side. We saw this with our last event on April 15th, where we had a little bit of a late trough ejection, and it does appear that that might be a little bit of the case with this particular setup. Previously, the timing was looking pretty good, and that we would see a pretty high likelihood, much higher likelihood than last time, for discrete dryline development in southern portions of the risk area across southwest Kansas into the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles. But that does not appear to be so much the case now. As you saw on that outlook, they have split up the enhanced risk here with just a slight risk in the middle to cover that concern of the trough being maybe a little bit more poorly timed for discrete dryline initiation. Going to need a little bit of extra help from the surface low and triple point up here in western and northwest Kansas to get storms to go in that region. But we will see this trough eject overnight, and that will be an impetus for that second round of storms here in that northwest Texas to central Oklahoma vicinity. But we are going to need some extra help to get anything to go today along the dry line, and that will be where our triple point sets up. Speaking of our triple point, let's go to our surface data. Now, you don't see much at this point at all. Not much of a surface low here has developed across the eastern Colorado vicinity at this point. That's because we have, again, that trough lagging a little bit farther back, so our stronger flow aloft has not been able to traverse the Rockies at this point, but it is starting to traverse the Rockies at this point. And so by late morning, early afternoon, we will start to see that surface low really crank there across eastern Colorado. We will see that pretty rapidly tighten up and intensify and deepen there across eastern Colorado, and that will be help kind of really formulate those boundaries that we need to for that severe weather threat, especially that dry line and then that warm front out to the east. And where those intersect, that's again going to be our triple point where our greatest severe threat is expected to be, at least during the daytime with this particular setup. Let's go down to 850 millibars. Once again, because we haven't seen a very strong low-level response yet, not much of a low-level jet to speak of. We do have about a 25, 30 knot low-level jet here extending down into the southern plains, 40, 45 knots here across the Dakotas, but not much of a low-level jet to speak of, and that should stay pretty much the same throughout much of the day. And then by late afternoon, early evening is when we will start to see that low-level jet really ramp up. That will, of course, increase low-level shear pretty significantly, and that's when we could see that strong tornado threat develop with any more mature discrete supercells in that western Kansas corridor. Let's go to some surface data here. This is our raw surface data. Take a look at where our 60s dew points are at this point. You can see we've started to see just a little bit of semblance of a surface low development there in eastern Colorado, kind of that counterclockwise flow centered across eastern Colorado. Again, that is expected to really tighten up going into the afternoon hours today, and that will really sharpen that dry line to the south and that warm front off to the east. Speaking of the warm front, the boundary between the 60s dew points and the much more meager dew points to the north looks to be somewhere in here, kind of the northern Oklahoma into southwest Kansas corridor. 60s dew point somewhere right in there. So that's kind of our developing warm front, the leading edge of our better moisture. That will kind of, again, because we don't have a robust low-level response until probably early afternoon, we won't see that warm front do much, and therefore we will see that triple point probably set up somewhere in this vicinity, western Kansas up toward the I-70 corridor, and that will be our favored corridor for storm initiation in this environment. Dryline has begun to develop as well. Dew points in the 30s back here across New Mexico. Still a little bit, not quite tight gradient at this point. We see just a very weak gradient across this area at this point, but we will see that tighten up again as those 60s dew points really start to pump their way north into the region here. You see 60s, mid to upper 60s dew points across Oklahoma, North Texas. Those will continue to stream northward this afternoon ahead of that dry line, and that will really start to tighten up. We'll get dry air to come in from the west, and that boundary will tighten up somewhere here in that far western Kansas, Oklahoma Panhandle, Texas Panhandle vicinity for this afternoon and early evening. So looking good as far as the low-level moisture goes. How about our moisture quality in the vertical? So this is our observed sounding at Amarillo, Texas this morning. I can tell you outside right now it is we're pretty socked in clouds here, and that is evidenced here on our visible satellite imagery, current visible satellite imagery. Lots of clouds across this region. Some higher clouds here moving out of the southwest, evidence of that southwesterly flow moving in ahead of the trough, and quite a bit of low cloud cover here as that moisture starts to make its way northward. Temperatures have cooled to the dew point very shortly above the surface, so we have kind of the low cloud cover hanging on here. That should break going into the afternoon. We should see some breaks in the clouds here and that will allow for storm development up to the north, especially where cloud breaks are a little bit more prevalent, a little bit more clearing. Down to the south, we may stay socked in clouds a little bit longer, and therefore that will delay any development if it does develop along the dry line. And again, that is quite conditional given some of that trough, the poor timing of the trough here this afternoon and evening. So going to some soundings here. This is our Amarillo sounding. So we do have quite a shallow moist layer here, very shallow moisture. Not what we were seeing a couple days ago. That was pretty interesting. A couple days ago, we noted that the sounding down at Brownsville, Texas, within the warm moist air mass coming up, was that moisture was quite deep in the vertical, extending up above, almost up to about 700 millibars or so. That has changed as we've had a very pretty stout elevated mixed layer make its way off to the east atop this moist layer, that layer of warm, dry, well-mixed air, steep lapse rates aloft. Very deep layer of steep lapse rates aloft. A little bit drier air up there to about 500 millibars. That is our elevated mixed layer, and that has kind of shallowed out the moist layer a little bit. But we do have enough moisture. Again, this is the higher terrain here off to the west, here on the Caprock, Amarillo, and up into southwest Kansas. So not going to be as much of an issue if we were a little bit farther to the east there, say in the Central Plains, kind of central Oklahoma, North Texas. But still something to note as we go forward with this event. Kinematically, looking pretty good at this point. Stronger deep layer shear starting to impinge upon the region. 40 plus knots of effective bulk shear. Some nice curvature in the low levels of the photograph. Nice veering and strengthening of the low level winds with height. 200 meters square per second squared effective storm relativity. So our kinematics are good, and they will probably continue to increase, especially with northward extent first. Closer to that surface low as it develops, those low level winds will back and strengthen, and then we'll see a similar response down to the south, probably delayed until the evening hours. And so initially we will see strong low level shear up ahead of the surface low up here, western Kansas, up into eastern Colorado, and then we'll see that respond down to the south closer to the evening hours, Texas Panhandle down into northwest Texas for that second round of storms in the nighttime hours. Plenty of instability already. 1900 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE here this morning at 12Z, so that's pretty solid instability, and that is expected to increase going into the afternoon as we get some more cloud breaks and the trough starts to move in closer to this evening. So all in all, a nice loaded gun type sounding here. Pretty stout cap will be in place for much of the day, but that again will be aided by the tightening of the dry line up north, the moisture return up north, and that surface low development out in eastern Colorado. That will help to provide some surface convergence to allow storms to break through any remaining cap, and that cap itself will probably erode as we get surface heating going into the afternoon hours. Here's a sounding at Dodge City, just off to the north. Much of the same, maybe a little bit deeper moisture here, but not all that different. Not as much dry air aloft, still a nice stout elevated mixed layer here. Lapse rates in excess of 8 degrees Celsius per kilometer there in that layer. So plenty of instability already this morning thanks to this elevated mixed layer, and kinematically looking pretty good. Strong warm convection ongoing across the region, hence the strongly clockwise curved photographs. So that is pretty good here for this particular setup. Let's take a look maybe a little bit farther south, Midland area. Same thing, kind of a loaded gun type profile. A little bit drier air farther to the south. That may help impede storm development, hold off storm development, especially for much of the day, and in concert with the delayed trough ejection. That will help preclude most dryline development. We still could see a dryline storm or two if there's any areas of slightly higher convergence or bulging along the dry line, but it does not look all that favorable for dryline convection today as the trough is lagging back, and we'll have some drier air aloft and a pretty stout capping inversion in place, and that will not be too much of an issue up north where those aforementioned features are located. All right, how about some model data? This is the 12Z or 6Z NAM. I'm doing this a little bit earlier than usual because we need to get on the road here early, but this is the 6Z NAM. Pretty good idea of what we're going to see later on today. This is at 500 millibars. Here's our trough out here in the desert southwest, western Mexico. That will continue to make its way eastward. And you'll notice here the timing difference, the timing issues that we're talking about here. This is at 4 p.m. The leading edge of that stronger belt of flow associated with the jet streak only starting to impinge into the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles by this point. Again, our main surface feature is still well out here. Dry line is still well off to the east, so we'll probably preclude storm development out there. We do have a little bit of forcing up in here, Perhaps a little bit better defluence aloft up in this region, just based on what I was looking at last night. You see a little bit better defluence up here across that western Kansas corridor, that spreading apart of the wind vectors in the upper levels. That should help initiate storms here probably after 4 p.m. I would say 21 to 22 Z, 4 to 5 p.m. is when we'll start to see storm initiation up there on the surface low as that cap holds through much of the day. And then we'll finally get those 60s dew points up into that area, and the surface low will make its way up, start to develop there across eastern Colorado, despite a lack of overall stronger forcing for ascent moving in until delayed until probably 21 to 0 Z time frame, and even farther, and perhaps even later. But we still should have enough convergence along the surface boundaries for storm initiation there in western Kansas by about 4 to 5 p.m. Not much down in the dryline area down here in the Texas and Oklahoma Panhandle, southwest Kansas. Our axis of the trough still well back in here at this point, Arizona-New Mexico border, so still lagging well behind the jet core, still way back here in southern New Mexico. So that is, again, a little bit of an issue with today's setup, and I think that's one of the things that's similar to last week's setup, the April 15th setup, in that we may have a tendency for any storms that do fire to be not really have that large scale support to maintain themselves. But if a storm does fire, it still would have an all hazards threat. Just it's looking less likely because of the delaying in the overall trough ejection here into the southern plains. But eventually that trough will eject into the southern plains, take on a nice negative tilt as we move into tomorrow morning. We'll hold that thought on tomorrow for a second, but that is the overall progression of the trough for this Thursday setup today. Going down to the surface, let's take a look at our surface map here. So you see not much going on here up with that surface low, pending surface low there in eastern Colorado until about late morning, early afternoons when we really start to see that tighten there across that area. Nice broad surface low there across eastern Colorado by 21 Z. This is 4 p.m. Central Time, 3 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll zoom in here to our Central Plains sector so you can see a little bit better how this is going to look. So nice broad, tightly wound surface low there. Warm front draped off to the east. You can see the wind shift there in the gradient between the warmer temperatures to the south, cooler temperatures to the north. Dry line looks to set up somewhere in this region as well. So again, that will be our triple point somewhere in the western Kansas, northwest Kansas vicinity. That will be our main initiation mechanism at the surface for severe weather, severe storms there in this region. And our moisture looks to be getting up that way as well. I'll go down to our southern plains sector first. So again, our 60s dew points, if we fast forward to now, starting to creep up into southwest Kansas at this point, but they will continue to make their way north as that surface low really tightens. They'll make their way north up into northern Kansas, northwest Kansas. So the true triple point looks to be maybe up in this vicinity here, up toward the Kansas-Nebraska border. But ahead of the surface low, even a little bit away from the triple point, we should see development down here, a little bit down along the length of the dry line down into western Kansas, places like Scott City. There north, maybe all the way down to Garden City. Could be a favored corridor for kind of an arc of supercells forming along that dry line and up to the triple point. Not usually a fan of these warm sectors, these triple points where you have kind of this pinched off look to it. That means storms will be firing up here on the triple point. They will be moving kind of more northeast up in this vicinity, kind of out of the moisture tongue. So if anything fires here right on the triple point, there may be some concern that they begin to outrun the overall moisture axis, and we'd be looking here perhaps from a chasing perspective a little bit farther to the south, where the warm front is a little bit more broad here. Just something to note there in this regime up to the north. And something to watch as storm motions will be mostly off to the north-northeast, given slightly more meridional flow aloft in this vicinity up there. So we'll have to watch that for sure, especially going toward the early evening hours. We'll have to make sure and see how that is going to play out. But any storms that do fire should tend to be semi-discrete initially. Here is our dry line. I'll draw that in here. And our shear vectors are nicely perpendicular to that dry line. So any storms that form should have a nice discrete, semi-discrete window to maintain that kind of more favorable mode for all severe hazards. And any more mature supercells in this environment that don't outrun the overall moisture axis could produce some strong tornadoes and very large hail. So definitely a potent look there up on the portion of the dry line up there near the triple point. Down to the south, much of the same, but again more conditional given the lagging behind of the overall trough. So let's take a couple soundings here. So this is the moisture going into the evening hours. That moisture kind of sits there into northwest Kansas. We do get a little bit of moisture up here into northeast Colorado, kind of in an upslope flow regime north of the surface low. You see up here we have kind of more easterly flow up into northeast Colorado, more upslope flow going up the higher terrain there. Could see a few supercells up there as well. And that little tongue of moisture far southwest Nebraska, northeast Colorado. That could be a favored corridor for supercell development as well. But our main risk does appear to be down here along that triple point and northern portions of the dry line. So let's take a few soundings here. We'll take a sounding here at 21Z, maybe in northeast Colorado. Just a couple soundings here across this corridor. We'll take one here maybe near the Colby, Kansas area, just south of that triple point. Then we'll take one down here along the dry line, maybe the Oklahoma Panhandle, to take a look at that, just to interrogate the entire region. So here we are, northeast Colorado. Our deep layer shear is going to be much weaker to start up in the northern portions of the risk area. And low-level shear not expected to be all that strong up here as well, at least initially up here into northeast Colorado. So that is something to watch for sure. A little bit less moisture, but again, in northeast Colorado, a little bit higher terrain, so it doesn't quite matter as much. Down here into Kansas, this is a little bit of a change from previous runs. The NAM here is much less potent with the overall low-level shear initially with this setup. So that is interesting to see. Previous runs, I'll go back to a previous run here, perhaps maybe to yesterday morning, and I'll show you what was looking a little bit, what the NAM was progging for kind of the 4 p.m. time frame here today. So this is what we're seeing currently. Stronger deep layer shear for supercells, but very weak low-level shear. This is what we were talking about earlier on. A little bit stronger low-level shear initially, but low-level shear, again, is expected to increase going into the evening hours. We've seen kind of a straightening of those photographs. So initially with these supercells, the threat should certainly be large to very large hail. Plenty of nice looking environment here for large hail. The NAM, again, does tend to be a little bit too cool at the surface, so we could get up into the upper 70s there. That would help erode this cap a little bit more. Nice stout elevated mixed layer there, in excess of 9 degrees Celsius per kilometer lapse rates in that little layer of steep lapse, that deeper layer of steep lapse rates there. But again, those surface boundaries, stronger surface convergence along the dry line, triple point, and warm front ahead of the surface low will help force storms through any remaining capping inversion. Overall, fairly minimal capping inversion at this point. Negative 70 convective inhibition. That is definitely can be overcome pretty easily with some convergence along those boundaries. But decent instability, 2,600 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape, so actually strong instability with fairly straight looking photographs, not much low level shear. That should foster a nice large to very large hail threat in the initial portion of the convective life cycle. Down here along the dry line, a little bit more stout cap, warmer temperatures down here, so if we can get up into the low to mid 80s even, we could see some attempts at convective initiation down here, but the cap is looking a little bit more stout down with southern extent there to the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles. Hence the removal of the enhanced risk in this region, a little bit more conditional in this area. Strong deep layer shear, weak low level shear, so initially a large hail threat would be maintained with these supercells. Let's go back to our 6Z NAM here, and we'll take a look at 0Z, and we'll see how the environment changes by 0Z. So here we go, northeast Colorado, up on the triple point here in northwest Kansas, and then again down on the dry line there. Take one in the northern Texas panhandle. So here we are, northeast Colorado, and this is when we start to see the overall kinematics really improve, and that tornado threat will ramp up closer towards 0Z. Here we are, northeast Colorado. This is a pretty favorable sounding for Colorado standards. Nice instability, 2,100 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape. Nice moisture there in the low level, 63/56. Plenty of moisture for the higher terrain of northeast Colorado, and a nicely clockwise curved photograph. Nice easterly flow at the surface, upslope flow at the surface, veering to more southerly or south-southwesterly flow in the low levels. Nice clockwise curved photographs, and upwards of 300 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. So plenty of juice there for a tornado threat in that northeast Colorado corridor. Down into northwest Kansas, and that is a very favorable look for an all hazards threat, perhaps transitioning to more of a tornado threat up there closer to 0Z. Nice beefy instability there, 3,200 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape, 71/65 at the surface. That's probably a little bit too cool, so you can imagine maybe 75/65. That would help erode any remaining little inhibition here Very minimal inhibition. We do get some moistening of the entire profile there, but pretty much we're fully destabilized by this time, and that should be favorable for surface-based supercells. And then our wind profiles have really improved by this point as well. Strong deep layer shear for supercells, 50 knots of effective bulk shear, and that low-level hodograph looks pretty darn favorable for tornadic supercells. Nice clockwise curvature to the hodographs. Strong streamwise vorticity here in the lowest levels of the atmosphere. Strongly veering and strengthening winds with height. That is a recipe for pretty pretty high likelihood of tornadic supercells here with any storms that can maintain a discrete mode, which again is fairly likely here in the first few hours of development. So fairly good looking setup there for tornadoes, perhaps a couple strong, given strong low level shear, 300 plus meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity with strong instability. That is a recipe for significant tornadoes. Down to the south, again, stronger capping. I think this is way too cool at the surface down here. Depending on how the cloud cover is handled going into the afternoon, if we have this cloud cover stick around, then we will not get surface temperatures up into the 80s, which we'll probably need for convective initiation down here, probably the mid 80s down here. But stronger capping, more shallow moisture, that should lead to that should preclude any development down here along the dry line until much later when the trough swings its way in. So that's western Kansas corridor certainly looking like the favored corridor for that all hazards threat, including the threat for a strong tornado or two. Then we continue into the evening hours here, 3-6Z. Probably start to see storm initiation down here in the southern target and a degradation of the discrete mode down up in the northern target. But down here in the southern target here, we'll take a sounding in northwest Texas. We should see a pretty favorable setup there. Strong low-level jet enhancement after dark as that surface low continues to deepen. But here we go. We're almost fully destabilized here by 6Z. This is 1 a.m. Central Time. Strong instability here with strong low-level shear could foster a few, kind of an MCS here, given stronger forcing moving in. With an embedded tornado threat and damaging wind risk down here as well. So certainly folks in the northwest Texas to central Oklahoma corridor should keep those weather radios handy this evening, as we could see a few spin-up tornadoes, perhaps not out of the question to see a stronger spin-up here within this kind of QLCS mode down to the south as it moves into northwest Texas and southwest and central Oklahoma into the evening and early morning hours tonight. So definitely looks like we will see storm development, but it is going to be delayed down here across the northwest Texas corridor until later on this evening into the overnight hours. So that's what it's looking like for today. Let's take a look quickly at some high-resolution model data here. This is the 12Z HRRR run coming in. We do see some development out here. We've had some severe thunderstorms this morning out here across northern Kansas. Those are expected to move off quickly to the east, not going to impede our setup out to the west at all. And you see by about 21 to 22Z robust supercell development right up there on that triple point in northwest Kansas. Some development back here into northeast Colorado as well. Quickly become robust supercells out in here. We do see some degradation of the mode, but some semi-discrete supercells in here by early evening. Those would pose that risk for large hail and eventually that tornado and perhaps strong tornado threat as these storms move off to the northeast. But again, notice how the storm motion is a little bit off this way. The overall warm sector looks something like that, so they may have a tendency to move out of the overall moist axis. That is one of the concerns up there, more of a brief window, but we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Just curious here, this is the hour 13 here, and I just want to see where the overall moisture axis is located on the HRRR, and so you see that pretty clearly here with this HRRR run. The moist axis somewhere in here, and those storms are well up in here. I'll go back to our reflectivity here and show you where that moist axis is located relative to the overall. I guess that's not going to work. Let's go back to the moisture here real quick and show you where that moist axis is. Again, this is at 8 p.m. Central Daylight Time, 7 p.m. Mountain Standard or Mountain Daylight Time. We'll go back to our reflectivity here, put that back on, and you can see clearly that those are north of the moisture axis. Now we do see pretty robust moisture up here, mid to upper 50s dew points north of that kind of tongue there of 60s dew points. So we still very well may have surface-based supercells up in here, and we'll take a sounding just for kicks, just to the north there, southeast of these ongoing storms. We do see a little bit of a cool layer up in here, so that is something of concern. We may see those storms outrun the moist axis pretty quickly. We'll have to wait and see how that works out as we kind of have that pinched look to the overall warm sector up there. But if this is the case, they do outrun the warm sector, that would foster more of a large to very large hail threat, given the storms may have a tendency to be a little bit more elevated. With the tornado threat remaining with any storms that can stay closer to the warm front and into that better moisture axis to the south. So interesting look there from the HRRR, and that is just something to keep in mind with this setup. It's important to not really blindly look at these convection allowing models, and it's important to look at where these storms are, and they do appear that they maybe start out in the moisture axis, but they may outrun the moisture axis pretty quickly and become elevated north of the warm front. Up there in northeast Colorado as well, few robust supercells would definitely foster a tornado and large hail threat with those as they move off to the northeast. Not much development down here on the dry line. We do see some attempts farther south along the dry line, but they are very limited and do not become robust at all, and that is because of the aforementioned reasons we talked about earlier. And then you see some additional development in northwest Texas by about 5Z. This is midnight, moving into southwest Oklahoma. Kind of a quick transition to a linear mode down there, but again, a few embedded tornadoes, perhaps a strong little spin up in there or two, with some damaging winds possible as the storms move into central Oklahoma toward the OKC metro and into southern Kansas Friday morning. Severe threat will persist into Friday morning with those storms as they move off to the east. All right, let's take a look at another model here, WRF ARW. Just another convection allowing model we like to use. So the WRF ARW, so this is I guess the 12Z run is not quite out yet. So we'll look at the 0Z run from last night. And you see not really enough convection out here to the east, but we do see that move off pretty quickly. And then we do see development out here. Now, the WRF ARW last night did have some robust attempts at development down here along the dry line. We're interested to see how that has changed this morning, but we did have a couple models last night that had some robust development along the dry line, so we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But again, our most guaranteed area is going to be up on that triple point for any robust sustained development, and those storms down to the south may have a tendency to struggle in that environment until the forcing comes in. Then you see that second round of storms fire up northwest Texas into Oklahoma, going into the overnight hours into the morning hours tomorrow. An SSL WRF model from last night as well. We'll just take a look at this last one here before moving on. And you see here we have some stuff out there in eastern Kansas, Oklahoma, and then development out here into western Kansas and northeast Colorado. You see some stuff down here farther to the south along the dry line. Interested to see how that has played out this morning, but our best chance up there in northwest Kansas where that moisture axis is. And then that stuff down into northwest Texas tonight. So pretty similar solution here. We'll have to watch. Interested to see how the morning models have handled this area in southwest Kansas to the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles, kind of in the middle of the two enhanced risk areas, it does appear to be pretty conditional, given some of the things we've looked at previously in this video. So let's go ahead and move to Friday now. I'll move back to the Friday, to the large view here. Start off at 0Z Friday, so 7 p.m. this evening, and we'll see how the trough progresses into tomorrow. Nice negatively tilted trough into this evening. That will continue to be the case going into tomorrow. It will really start to take on a negative tilt as it moves into the Midwest by tomorrow early afternoon. This is at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the closed 500 millibar trough right there on the Nebraska-South Dakota border. Strong flow out ahead of that, nice defluence out ahead of that as well, and our main flow extending back down into the southern and central plains. So that will continue off. That will be the progression of the trough into Friday. We'll quickly move off to the northeast, and then we'll see our second trough for our Saturday-Sunday system quickly moving in on its heels. We'll talk about Saturday-Sunday here in a second. But Friday here, the main threat should be out ahead of this trough up here into Nebraska, Iowa, down into northeast Kansas. But they do have that risk that does extend down here into eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas. We are kind of behind the trough axis here, interestingly enough. We do have some stronger flow aloft, kind of in that right entrance region, if you will, of the jet streak. Kind of back in this region here. Could be a favored corridor for supercells along the dry line. Dry line not expected to push east all that far. So we'll have to watch that. It is conditional down here to the south, given kind of a lack of forcing, more nebulous forcing here with southern extent. The greatest forcing going to be up here out ahead of this closed low at 500 millibars up in the Midwest into Nebraska. But down here to the south, it is a little bit less clear how things will play out going down into southern Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, southwest Missouri. We'll take a look at our surface low now. I'll back this up to this evening. So very tight surface low here by this evening, and that will continue off to the east as we go into the day tomorrow. And that will maneuver itself to somewhere there in the northern Nebraska corridor by about 21Z tomorrow. So about 4 p.m. tomorrow, that is where the NAM has the surface low. And right away you can see some similarities to cold core setups, to our typical cold core tornado schematic that we often look at in these videos. So our surface low located right in here, northern Nebraska. If we take a look at our 500 millibar low, we're just off to the northwest there along the Nebraska-South Dakota border. Very close proximity between those two. That is a classic characteristic of cold core tornado setups. Would suspect that we have a nice little tongue of moisture moving its way up into the region here. Nice little tongue of dew points up into here. The NAM doesn't quite have it moving all the way up into that region. The better moisture is certainly down in here, and so that, as outlined by the SPC, that area here of southeast Nebraska, southwest Iowa, northeast Kansas, northwest Missouri would be the favored corridor for development, for more robust development. But if we can get a little bit more moisture up here onto the surface low, we could see more of a cold core risk develop up there into north central Nebraska tomorrow afternoon. Again, the severe risk will be ongoing tomorrow morning as the overnight activity moves east into eastern Oklahoma, eastern Kansas, and Missouri, western Arkansas. So that could foster a severe threat and perhaps conditional, and as we said, it is conditional whether or not we'll see development on the dry line back down here to the south across central Oklahoma, southeast Kansas. But you can see that the dry line does not push off all that much to the east. It kind of stalls out and eventually even retreats back to the northwest a little bit, going into Friday evening. So we'll have to see if we can get storm development here on the dry line. Very conditional down here, but we'll have to, again, Friday is going to hinge on how today plays out, but the main severe risk is expected to be up in here where that greater moisture is located, somewhere up in that Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa confluence area. Take a sounding here 4 p.m. from this kind of area here, southeast Nebraska. Take one down along the dry line as well, kind of east central Oklahoma. So this is what we're looking at up here near the surface low and just southeast of the surface low near that 10% hatched area up in southeast Nebraska. This is at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Very thick instability here, very fat instability. 2,800 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape, 74 over 64 at the surface. Very juicy low-level air mass. 0 to 3 kilometer cape in excess of 200 joules per kilogram. So that is very, very intense instability in the low levels of the atmosphere that will help aid in the tilting and stretching of any vorticity or surface spin into the vertical to support a tornado threat with the storms in that pocket of moisture. Nice curvature there in the low levels as well. A nice low-level shear values there, curvature in the hodograph, veering and strengthening winds with height. This is all in all a very good-looking profile, especially with enhanced surface vorticity near those surface boundaries for a tornado threat up there, and could be a strong tornado threat as we go into the early evening hours. This is down on the dry line, a little bit drier air down here in east central Oklahoma, a little bit more shallow moisture. Still unstable environment, 1,500 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape. Some curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph. Not a ton, not a super lengthy hodograph, but still enough strong deep layer shear for supercells. Some curvature there in the low levels of the hodograph. So if any storms can fire, again, it's very conditional given that we're kind of behind the main axis of the trough. If we can get a storm to fire through strong surface heating, some convergence along the dry line, then that would foster an all-hazard threat. And any development is expected to be isolated down here with southern extent, given a lack of overall forcing. But if we do get a storm to go, it could foster a threat for some large hail, some damaging winds, and maybe a tornado or two. But again, that main risk expected to be up here to the north, up here in this moisture tongue, up in here, kind of that Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri confluence area. Here we are at 0Z. Up on the NAM in that moisture tongue, and this is what we're talking about. Very unstable environment, in excess of 2,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape, strong low-level instability, approaching 200 joules per kilogram of 0 to 3 kilometer cape there, with strongly curved low-level hodographs, strong veering and strengthening of the winds with height. That would certainly favor a threat for strong tornadoes potentially, with over 300 meters squared per second squared effective storm eligibility in this unstable of an environment. So certainly something to watch for tomorrow, and does appear that that little tongue up here ahead of the southeast of the surface low where the best moisture is, that is going to be our favorite corridor for significant severe tomorrow. And then down on the dry line, we'll take a sounding here, east central Oklahoma once again. And again, this conditional threat does extend down into North Texas, pretty rich moisture down there. And there you go. We're perfectly uncapped by 0Z. Plenty of instability, 2,300 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, 75 over 67 at the surface. Pretty deep moisture down here as well, with strongly curved photographs, strong low-level shear, in excess of 300 meters squared per second squared effective storm meltability. So certainly could see a tornado threat develop with any supercells, but again, it is going to be quite conditional down here in this southern mode. Let's take a look at the HER, 12Z HER. Let's see if it's out yet. It does not appear that it is out far enough yet. So we'll take a look at that. If it's far enough out, we can at least kind of get an idea of what we might see going into tomorrow afternoon. So here we go. We do see kind of that additional development there. Southeast Nebraska, out ahead of the surface low. Pretty robust look there right along the border between Nebraska and Iowa. This might be a little bit too far east. The HER does tend to be a little bit too far east biased, so perhaps that could be back in here, this kind of arc of supercells, and this would have that all hazard threat, including the threat for significant tornadoes. Down along the dry line, not much activity. We do see maybe some attempts here southwest Missouri, northeast Oklahoma, eastern Oklahoma, but not really all that robust because of the nebulous background forcing for ascent. But we'll have to, that is an area we're certainly going to have to watch, this corridor from southeast Kansas southward into eastern Oklahoma, northern Texas, for a conditional all hazards threat developing there. But again, our greatest threat with the greatest forcing going to be up here ahead of the trough and southeast of the surface low and east of the dry line. So pretty potent look here on the HRRR. Again, this is just one cam, 24 plus hours out, so take it with a grain of salt, but at least kind of gives you an idea of what we might see going forward into tomorrow. Then we go to Saturday. Saturday has had the look of a pretty potent event for quite some time. This first system, even though it has quite a robust severe threat with it, will have a threat, will kind of act as a primer system. So it's going to bring that moisture northward, and that moisture is not going to go anywhere. That dry line kind of sloshes back to the west, and then we have a very broad warm sector in place for Saturday. Warm front all the way up here into the Great Lakes region, dry line down to the south, Kansas into Oklahoma, into Texas. Very broad warm sector full of rich low-level moisture here for that severe threat on Saturday. And this is looking to be pretty potent. So I'll zoom back out here, go to the 500 millibar map for you. So we'll start off Friday evening, that second trough close on the heels of that first one that will have pose our Thursday, Friday severe risk. Then the timing of this second trough is much more favorable than this first one for a robust severe threat on Saturday. You can see it, the forcing really starts to impinge upon the central and southern plains really early on in the day. 15 to 18Z, we already have the jet streak here impinging upon Kansas into Oklahoma. Strong flow rounding the base of this trough, somewhat neutrally tilted at this point. Probably eventually will take on a negative tilt with time there, and as you see, that is the case. A little bit of a short wave perhaps on the leading edge of this little jet streak here. See if we see anything at 700 millibars. And so yeah, definitely see a little bit of a kink here in the height contours, and this is at 4 p.m. Plenty well within the warm sector, so probably we're going to see pretty early development on Saturday, perhaps as early as the lunchtime hour. We'll already have plenty of moisture in place, plenty of instability in place, but early convection is a current concern with this setup. We have, given the forcing that is moving in pretty early, we may have a lot of convection go up early, and how that is going to interact with the overall environment in the warm sector is unclear at this point. But if we don't see as much convection early on, or if we see it move out pretty quickly, then we will have a pretty untapped warm sector for later on in the afternoon, and that will pose that will have a pretty negligible impact on the environment down here across Kansas into Oklahoma. So down here to the south, let's take a look at our warm sector here. You see very tight dry line here making its way up to the north, 18Z, 21Z, very tight dry line here, western Oklahoma to south central Kansas. Take a couple soundings here and show you. We will have pretty strong surface low development out here again across the the central high plains. You see initial surface low moves off quickly to the northeast. We're quickly replacing that with a secondary surface low that develops in eastern Colorado going into the morning hours on Saturday. Really starts to take shape on Saturday morning and afternoon there in southwest Kansas to really provide that broad warm sector out ahead of it for severe weather. So I'll zoom back in here. We'll start off with our southern sector here. We'll take a sounding southern Kansas. and then one in kind of the Oklahoma City area. This is one of those days that I'm certainly worried about, as it could be a pretty interesting setup for my area in central Oklahoma, and you can see why here. The NAM is painting a pretty significant picture for the Saturday afternoon time frame. This is at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time Saturday. Pretty strong instability, approaching 4,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. Strong low-level instability as well. Very stout low-level instability, approaching 200 joules per kilogram. 81 over 65 at the surface. Very rich low-level moisture. Deeper low-level moisture than our initial setup here Thursday, Friday. So all signs are pointing to a thermodynamic environment, certainly favorable for robust and supercells that will become quickly severe. Photographs looking good as well. Strong deep layer shear for supercells, approaching 60 knots there of effective bulk shear. Strong curvature there in the low levels of the photograph. Somewhat unidirectional flow in the lowest kilometer or so. So that is something to watch for sure. May temper the tornado threat a little bit, but overall curvature there in the low levels of the photograph pretty potent. And so that should foster that all hazards threat down into, that's up into central Kansas, here we are in central Oklahoma. Pretty much the exact same setup. Deep moisture, very stout instability, especially in the low levels, and a strong look there kinematically. So that is what we're dealing with on Saturday. Looking like a pretty potent setup for severe weather. If we can keep the warm sector free and clear of convection, or at least move the early convection out of the way, we should have a pretty potent setup on our hands for Saturday. Again, we're still a couple days out, so there's a little bit of uncertainty how this will play out, but overall, we are expecting to see a robust severe threat develop down here in Kansas and Oklahoma, hence the 30% significant area down in that region. Off to the north, there is that slight risk that does extend off to the northwest. We do have a little bit of an early shortwave. So this is our Friday wave that is moving off quickly to the north and northeast. And we may start to see a little bit of development out here, maybe around the base of this jet streak. A little bit of a glancing blow down here could foster a severe threat out in here up into parts of Wisconsin, maybe southeast Minnesota, northern Illinois, and the moisture certainly will be far-reaching up into that corridor, so we could see a severe threat develop up in here. We'll take a sounding here from south central Wisconsin to see how the environment looks up there. So maybe ahead of that initial shortwave from Thursday, Friday, as it ejects off to the northeast, could see some additional development up there across that region. Large instability, some low-level shear, deep layer shear favorable for robust development. All in all, could see an all-hazards threat develop up there. But again, the main threat for Saturday is going to be down here across Kansas into Oklahoma, perhaps down into North Texas. Then we go into Sunday. That moisture continues to swing off to the east. We'll probably have additional developments Saturday night. And what happens Saturday night going to impact what happens on Sunday. So we don't really know much about Sunday yet. We're going to have to wait and see how Saturday plays out. But here's the trough going into Sunday. Kind of ejects off to the north. Gets a little bit strung out here. Not all that favorable at first glance for a really, really significant severe event on Sunday. But we could see a continuation of the threat into the Midwest and Mid-South here. Into Sunday, depending on how Saturday works out. We'll go to the GFS here and show you how the GFS is handling the trough going into Sunday, as the NAM doesn't really go out that far. So here we are. GFS has a potent look for Saturday as well. A little bit more negatively tilted on Saturday. We'll see as we're going by here, we'll see how it looks. And yeah, very potent look here for Saturday on the GFS. So GFS certainly on board with the NAM for a potent look in the central and southern plains on Saturday. Sounding from west central Oklahoma here on the GFS. While that's loading, I'll move this out ahead. So you see that moisture does stretch up into the Great Lakes region by Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon. And our trough is kind of up in here as well. A little bit more potent look here on the GFS. Nice negatively tilted trough moving into this region on Sunday. Might foster a little bit stronger of a severe threat up here into the Midwest. Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, perhaps Michigan. So we'll have to keep that in mind as we go into Sunday. Severe threat will persist south as well. So here's the GFS on Saturday. Pretty potent look as well. So pretty much on board with the NAM. Don't pay too much attention to the specifics here of the photograph and the skew-T, but overall, Saturday looking to be a pretty significant day across the Kansas and Oklahoma corridor. So folks in those regions certainly should be preparing for significant severe weather on that day. Regardless of if the significant tornado threat materializes, there probably will be quite a few instances of large hail and damaging winds with a lot of convection expected across the region. So that's going to wrap things up for this video. Again, a potent stretch of severe weather coming up for parts of the plains into the Midwest and Mid-South. Once again, a recap of what we're dealing with for today. Enhanced risk in 2 different areas here across western and northwest Kansas, northwest Texas into south central Oklahoma as well for a later round of storms. This northern area will be our main threat for at least daytime development up here into western Kansas, northwestern and northwest Kansas, up there to the I-70 corridor near that triple point. Again, storms may have a tendency to outrun the moisture axis, the main moisture axis, especially in northern areas of the risk, of the enhanced risk, given kind of a pinched look to the moisture axis up there. A little bit farther to the south, if anything can form down just to the south of that area, more into western Kansas, they'll have a little bit more real estate to work with, and therefore could have a longer duration threat for significant severe, including the threat for a strong tornado or two. SPC does have out that 10% hatched area there for that northern enhanced risk. And then the threat for a second round of storms here closer to the midnight hour and into the overnight hours tonight into tomorrow morning will exist across northwest Texas into central Oklahoma with a tornado damaging wind and initial large hail threat there. Large hail threat going to be a pretty significant risk in the northern portion of the enhanced risk area as well. So that's today. Tomorrow, we have that main threat looking to be right in that Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa confluence area where an enhanced risk has been outlined, level 3 out of 5 there. Chance for a strong tornado or two does exist in that corridor. Chance for some hail as well, with kind of an arc of semi-discrete supercells in that corridor just to the southeast of the surface low ahead of the dry line. Damaging wind also a threat, and a large hail, damaging wind. Large hail and tornado certainly the main threats, but damaging wind is a threat as well. More conditional threat down to the south here across eastern Oklahoma, southeast Kansas, western southwest Missouri, western Arkansas, northeast Texas, as we will be behind the trough. But if we get strong heating, stronger convergence along the dry line out in those regions, that could foster a robust but conditional and isolated severe threat out in those regions for an all-hazards threat potentially there. Then Saturday looks to be a very significant day across this region, contingent on morning convection. But a large enhanced risk from Kansas down into Oklahoma and North Texas, where we could see a pretty broad swath of significant severe weather develop there. Large hail, damaging winds, and the threat for significant tornadoes is certainly on the table for that enhanced risk area on Saturday. The threat extends up into the Great Lakes region as well, associated with that first trough that will be our main impetus for the Thursday-Friday system. And then Sunday, we don't really know much about Sunday yet, but the threat will certainly shift east into the Midwest, down into the Mid-South Arklatex region, and we could see a severe threat develop there. So with that, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.